The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council stood silent as Ambassador Kyle Harrison walked through its massive doors. The room stretched wider than 3 football fields and reached toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing maps of hundreds of worlds scattered across the galaxy. 15 different alien species sat in their designated sections, and each one watched the human with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. Kyle had represented humanity at this council for almost 3 years now. He had learned to read the subtle body language of species that had nothing in common with humans, except the ability to travel between stars. The Drathans sat with their 4 arms crossed over their armored chests. The Valorum floated in their containment fields like jellyfish in water. The Centauri tapped their triple-jointed fingers against their data tablets with mechanical precision. High Commander Vexthal of the Drathan Empire rose from his seat, and his voice boomed across the chamber. The translator implant in Kyle's ear converted the harsh clicks and growls into smooth English. The commander spoke about territorial assignments and military readiness. He talked about the need for strong species to guard the valuable core worlds, while weaker civilizations should be grateful for whatever scraps of space they received. Then Vexthal turned his attention to humanity. His words cut through the air like knives. He said humans had shown no military strength since joining the council. He said human ships were little more than cargo vessels with basic weapons attached. He said humanity's focus on trade and diplomacy revealed a species afraid of real conflict. He proposed that humans be assigned to the far edges of council space, where their weakness would matter less. Other council members nodded in agreement. The Centauri representative added that humanity's reluctance to participate in military exercises showed a concerning lack of martial spirit. The Valorum elder mentioned that human colonies always chose negotiation over confrontation when disputes arose with neighboring species. Even the smaller species who usually stayed quiet seemed to share the opinion that humans simply did not have the stomach for war. Kyle listened to it all without changing his expression. He had heard similar comments in previous sessions. The aliens looked at humanity's 3 years of peaceful behavior and saw only fear. They noticed that humans avoided confrontations and concluded that humans could not fight. They observed that human diplomats always sought compromise and decided that humans lacked courage. The ambassador waited until Vexthal finished speaking. Then Kyle stood and addressed the council. In his calm, measured voice, he said, humanity appreciated the council's concerns. He said humans understood that their reputation needed to be earned through actions rather than words. He requested only that humanity be given opportunities to prove their worth as members of the galactic community. The council members interpreted his polite response as more evidence of human timidity. Vexthal's mandibles clicked in, what Kyle's implant translated as dismissive laughter. The Drathan commander said he looked forward to seeing what humanity considered proof of worth. Then the emergency alert systems activated throughout the chamber. Red lights pulsed along the walls, and a priority message appeared on every holographic display. The Krell swarm had been detected moving toward council space. Initial reports showed 3 colony worlds already under attack. The insectoid race had come from beyond the galactic rim, and they showed no interest in communication or negotiation. The mood in the chamber shifted instantly. The Krell were known to every spacefaring species as a nightmare made real. They attacked in massive numbers, with no regard for their own casualties. They consumed everything in their path and left dead worlds behind. Previous encounters with the Krell had ended only when the swarm moved on to hunt elsewhere. The Council's military coordinator began organizing the response. Each member species would contribute ships and personnel to a joint defensive fleet. The coordinator went through the list systematically, calling on each representative to commit their forces. The Drathan would send their battle cruisers. The Valorum would deploy their energy projection ships. The Centauri would provide logistical support vessels. When the coordinator reached humanity's name, the entire chamber seemed to focus on Kyle. The ambassador felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching him. This was the moment that would define how the galaxy viewed his species. Every other representative had responded with immediate commitments of military force. Some had even boasted about the strength of their fleets. Kyle simply nodded once and said humanity would respond to the threat. He gave no details about fleet sizes or arrival times. He made no promises about what humans would or would not do. He just stated clearly that humanity understood the danger and would act accordingly. The council members exchanged glances that Kyle's implant struggled to interpret across so many different species. Most seemed satisfied that humanity had agreed to help, even if they expected little actual contribution. Vexthal's posture suggested he thought humans would send a token force to avoid embarrassment. The Centauri representative appeared to be calculating how much of humanity's limited military capacity would be consumed by this conflict. None of them understood what Kyle's calm acceptance actually meant. They did not know about the preparations that had been underway on Earth since the day humanity made first contact with alien life. They had never seen the classified reports about human military doctrine. They could not comprehend the difference between a species that feared battle and a species that understood battle too well. The session continued for another 2 hours as the council worked out coordination details for the defensive fleet. Kyle participated when questions involved humanity, but otherwise remained quiet. He noted which species were eager to prove their martial strength and which ones seemed worried about the casualties to come. He observed how the aliens approached warfare like it was a formal dance with established rules that everyone followed. When the session finally ended, Kyle returned to his quarters on the station. The encryption took almost 30 seconds to establish a link that even the most advanced alien intelligence services could not break. When the connection completed, Admiral Peter Grant's face appeared on the screen. Kyle did not waste time with pleasantries. He told the Admiral that the Council had requested military assistance against the Krell swarm. He provided the coordinates where the attacks were occurring and what little intelligence the Council had gathered about enemy force strength. He mentioned that the Council expected humanity to contribute a small token force. Admiral Grant's expression never changed as he listened to the report. When Kyle finished, the Admiral was quiet for several long seconds. Then he said humanity would send the Third Fleet. Kyle felt something cold move through his chest. The Third Fleet represented 30 warships and almost 15,000 personnel. It was one of humanity's primary military formations kept in constant readiness for exactly this kind of situation. The Admiral continued speaking in that same level tone. He said the fleet would depart within 12 hours. He said Captain Derek Shaw would command the operation with full authorization to engage the enemy as he saw fit. He said the Council was about to learn something important about humanity. Kyle understood what was coming. He had seen the classified footage of human war games and training exercises. He knew what human ships could do when their crews stopped holding back. He asked the Admiral if Earth Command was certain about this course of action. Admiral Grant's response was simple and final. He said humanity had avoided conflict for 3 years because peace was always preferable to war. But the Krell swarm threatened innocent lives, and the Council had requested help. Humanity would respond, and the galaxy would see what humans became when defense of others required it. The unified Earth Command headquarters sat deep beneath the mountains outside Geneva. The facility had been built 50 years before first contact, when humanity still wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now it served as the nerve center for all human military operations across dozens of star systems. Admiral Peter Grant stood in the primary operations room watching holographic displays that showed the position of every human military vessel in known space. Commander Lisa Torres moved through the organized chaos of the operations center with practiced efficiency. She had spent 15 years preparing for a moment exactly like this. Her screens showed the Third Fleet's current status. 30 warships, sitting in various orbital positions around Earth and Luna. Each ship maintained a constant state of readiness that would seem paranoid to an outside observer. Humanity had learned through bitter experience that being ready for war was the best way to prevent it. Lisa's fingers danced across her console as she issued mobilization orders. The response was immediate and smooth. Ship captains acknowledged their orders within seconds. Crew members who had been on shore leave received recall notices, and began returning to their vessels. Supply ships moved into position to top off fuel and munitions. The entire massive machinery of human military logistics shifted into high gear without hesitation or confusion. Admiral Grant walked over to where Lisa worked. He asked how long until the fleet could depart. She checked her readiness indicators and reported that all ships would be ready to move in 11 hours. The Admiral nodded and told her to make it 10. Lisa smiled slightly and adjusted her timeline. Around them, dozens of other officers coordinated the 1,000 details required to send a fleet into combat. On board the carrier UES Valiant, Captain Derek Shaw reviewed the mission briefing. His ready room felt small compared to the vast ship around him, but he preferred it that way. The cramped space reminded him that even the largest warship was just a tiny bubble of life surrounded by endless vacuum. The briefing materials showed what little the Council knew about the Krell swarm. Biological ships grown rather than built. Coordinated attacks, suggesting hive intelligence. Absolutely no diplomatic contact ever established. Derek had commanded the Valiant for 2 years. He knew every system on the ship and trusted his crew completely. Lieutenant Amy Wells served as his tactical officer, and she could read a battle situation faster than the ship's computers. Commander Ben Murphy ran the engineering section with an almost magical ability to keep systems running past their design limits. Lieutenant Jake Stevens controlled the weapons systems, and he approached his job with the focused intensity of a surgeon. The captain's door chimed, and Amy entered carrying her own analysis of the situation. She had gone through the Council's tactical data, and her assessment was not encouraging. She told Derek that the alien forces were fighting a defensive withdrawal. They had established a perimeter around the threatened colonies, but the Krell kept pushing through their lines. Casualty rates among the Council ships suggested they were not equipped or trained for this kind of warfare. Derek listened carefully and then asked Amy what she thought would happen when the Third Fleet arrived. She was quiet for a moment before answering. She said the Council expected humans to slot into their defensive formations and follow their tactical doctrine. She said the aliens would be shocked when human ships did something different. Derek agreed and told her to start running combat simulations based on human doctrine rather than Council procedures. Down in engineering, Ben Murphy was pushing his team through final system checks. The Valiant's reactors hummed with barely contained power. Her weapons systems had been tested and certified. Her armor plating could withstand impacts that would shred most alien vessels. But Ben knew that the real strength of any ship was its crew. He walked through the engineering spaces talking to his people and making sure everyone understood what was coming. A young technician asked Ben if it was true that humans had never fought a real space battle. The commander paused and considered his answer carefully. He said it was true that humanity had not fought other species in space. But humans had spent centuries fighting each other on Earth. They had learned lessons about warfare that were written in blood and fire. Those lessons had shaped every system on this ship and every procedure the crew followed. Jake Stevens stood in the weapons control center, surrounded by displays, showing the status of every offensive system the Valiant carried. Railguns that could accelerate projectiles to incredible speeds, missile batteries loaded with warheads ranging from conventional explosives to nuclear devices. Laser arrays powerful enough to cut through ship hulls. Point defense systems designed to intercept incoming fire. Electronic warfare suites that could blind enemy sensors and disrupt their targeting. The weapons were impressive, but Jake knew they were just tools. What mattered was how those tools were used. Human military doctrine had evolved through countless conflicts. It emphasized speed over elegance. It valued results over honor. It accepted that warfare was ugly and brutal, and the only thing that mattered was protecting your people by defeating the enemy as quickly as possible. Throughout the Third Fleet, similar preparations were underway. 30 ships and 15,000 personnel, getting ready to show the galaxy what humanity could do. They did not approach the coming battle with excitement or bloodlust. Most of them had family on Earth or the colonies. They understood that they might not come home, but they also understood that innocent people were dying, and someone needed to stop it. Admiral Grant received a communication from the President. Nathan Cole had led Earth's government for 6 years, and he understood the weight of sending people into combat. The president asked if the admiral was certain about this approach. Every other species in the council fought according to established rules and traditions. Humanity was about to show them a completely different kind of warfare. The admiral's response was measured and firm. He said humanity had tried to fit into galactic society by following the council's expectations. They had been diplomatic and patient and peaceful. But the council had interpreted those choices as weakness. Now, the Krell threatened innocent lives, and the council needed to see what humanity actually was. Not weak traitors afraid of conflict, but a species that understood war so well they did everything possible to avoid it. President Cole authorized the mission and wished the admiral success. The communication ended, and Grant returned his attention to the operations center. The countdown to departure showed 9 hours and 30 minutes remaining. Around the solar system, human warships were completing their final preparations. Captain Derek Shaw assembled his senior officers in the briefing room. Amy Wells and Ben Murphy and Jake Stevens and a dozen others sat around the conference table. Derek told them honestly what they faced. The Krell swarm had numbers and ferocity. The Council forces had experience and coordination. Humanity had something different. They had the accumulated knowledge of every war humans had ever fought. They had weapons and tactics designed not for honor, but for victory. They had the willingness to do what was necessary to protect others. No one in the room spoke for several seconds after Derek finished. Then, Amy asked what the rules of engagement would be. The captain's answer was simple. There were no Krell civilians. There were no Krell diplomats. The swarm existed only to consume and destroy. So humanity would engage with the full weight of human military doctrine. They would identify critical targets and eliminate them. They would use every advantage and accept no limitations except those required to protect friendly forces. Ben Murphy asked if the Council would accept human tactics. Derek said honestly that he did not know. But the Council had requested help, and humanity would provide it. If the aliens did not like human methods, they were welcome to complain after the battle was over. Jake Stevens mentioned that human weapons might shock the Council species. Many of the systems the Valiant carried were considered excessive or barbaric by galactic standards. Nuclear weapons were viewed as needlessly destructive. Railguns were seen as crude compared to energy weapons. Electronic warfare was regarded as dishonorable. The captain acknowledged all of that, and then pointed out that none of those opinions would matter if the Krell overran the colonies. Humanity would fight to win, and the galaxy would have to accept whatever that required. The meeting ended, and the officers returned to their duties. Throughout the ship, crew members made their final preparations. They checked their equipment and reviewed their procedures. They sent messages to loved ones, knowing those might be the last communications they ever sent. They did all the small rituals that humans had always done before going into battle. The 10-hour mark arrived, and the Third Fleet departed from Earth orbit. 30 warships accelerated away from humanity's homeworld and activated their faster-than-light drives. The journey to the combat zone would take several days. During that time, the fleet would drill constantly. They would practice maneuvers and test weapons and prepare for every possible scenario. Admiral Grant watched the fleet disappear from his sensors. He knew that what happened in the next few days would change humanity's relationship with the galaxy forever. The Council thought humans were weak. They were about to learn that humans simply understood the difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. The colony world of Petra 7 burned beneath a sky filled with hostile ships. The Krell swarm had arrived 3 days earlier and immediately begun their assault. Millions of colonists huddled in shelters, while above them the Galactic Council fleet fought to hold back the tide. High Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the battle unfold with growing frustration. The Drathan Empire had sent 20 of their finest warships to this fight. Each vessel followed doctrine that had been refined over thousands of years of warfare. They maintained formation discipline. They broadcast challenges to enemy commanders. They used weapons deemed honorable by galactic convention. But the Krell did not respond to challenges. They did not respect formations. They came in endless waves, like locusts, consuming everything in their path. Vexthal watched another of his escorts take critical damage from a Krell suicide attack. The organic enemy ship had simply rammed itself into the Drathan vessel's shields until both exploded. It was barbaric and wasteful and completely effective. The Drathan commander felt something he rarely experienced in combat. He felt doubt about whether traditional tactics could win this fight. Other Council species fought alongside the Drathan. The Valorum had deployed their energy projection ships, but the Krell bioarmor absorbed the elegant beam weapons with disturbing efficiency. The Centauri provided logistical support, but their supply lines kept getting cut by Krell raiders that ignored proper rules of engagement. Everywhere Vexthal looked, he saw a galactic military doctrine that was built for wars between civilized species struggling against an enemy that had no civilization to speak of. The Drathan commander opened communications with the other Council forces and requested status reports. The numbers were not encouraging. They had lost 8 ships in 3 days of fighting. Dozens more were damaged. The numbers. The Drathan commander. The Krell kept coming and showed no signs of weakening. Vexthal made the difficult decision to call for reinforcements from all Council members, including the humans whose contribution he had mocked just days earlier. The Third Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the combat zone. Captain Derek Shaw stood on the bridge of the UES Valiant and studied the tactical situation with cold professional assessment. His sensor officer reported contacts numbering in the thousands. The Krell swarm filled the space around Petra 7, like angry insects defending a hive. The Council fleet maintained a defensive perimeter, but it was clear they were slowly losing ground. Lieutenant Amy Wells pulled up tactical analysis on her screens. She showed Derek how the Council ships were fighting. They moved in predictable patterns. They communicated on open channels that any enemy could monitor. They used weapons that prioritized clean kills over effective damage. Amy said it looked like they were fighting a war game with strict rules rather than an actual battle for survival. Derek absorbed the information and felt something shift in his thinking. The Galaxy Council was not incompetent. Their ships and weapons were advanced. Their crews were trained and disciplined. But they were fighting the wrong kind of war. They approached combat as a formalized contest between equals. The Krell approached it as extermination. Commander Ben Murphy reported that all ship systems were ready for combat operations. The Valiant's reactors were running at full power. Her weapons were hot, and her defenses were active. Around the carrier, the rest of the Third Fleet maintained perfect formation. 29 other human warships waiting for orders. Derek opened a communication channel to all his ships and told them to prepare for immediate combat action. High Commander Vexthal noticed new contacts appearing on his sensors. The human fleet had arrived, and they were moving toward the Council defensive line. The Drathan commander felt a mixture of relief and skepticism. Relief that reinforcements had come. Skepticism that 30 human ships would make any real difference against thousands of Krell. Vexthal opened a communication channel to the human fleet. He began outlining where the human ships should take position in the defensive formation. He explained the tactical situation and described the strategy the Council forces were employing. He assigned the humans to a support role, protecting the supply vessels far from the primary combat zone. Captain Derek Shaw listened to the Drathan commander's instructions without interruption. When Vexthal finished, Derek thanked him politely for the briefing. Then, the human captain asked a simple question. He asked if they were here to win or to follow protocol. The directness of the question caught Vexthal off guard. No junior officer had ever interrupted his command briefing with such casual disregard for military hierarchy. The Drathan commander's voice carried an edge of anger as he demanded respect for proper chain of command. Derek responded calmly that humanity had great respect for results, but none at all for tradition that prevented victory. Vexthal began explaining the Council's strategic plan in more detail. The Allied forces would maintain defensive positions and gradually attrite the Krell numbers. They would protect the colonies and wait for the swarm to exhaust itself. It was a sound strategy based on thousands of years of galactic military experience. Admiral Peter Grant's voice cut into the communication from his position aboard the Valiant. He had been listening to the exchange and decided to intervene personally. The Admiral said he had reviewed the Council's tactical plan and found it insufficient. The Krell would eventually overwhelm the defensive line through sheer numbers. The colonies would fall, and millions would die. Humanity proposed an alternative approach. The Admiral outlined his plan in clear, concise terms. Human analysis had identified the Krell hive ships. These massive organic vessels coordinated the swarm and provided logistical support. Destroy the hive ships and the swarm would lose cohesion. The remaining Krell would become disorganized and vulnerable. It was a simple strategy, focused on eliminating critical enemy infrastructure. Multiple Council commanders spoke at once, rejecting the plan. The hive ships were positioned deep within the Krell formation. Reaching them would require penetrating thousands of hostile contacts. Casualties would be catastrophic. The risk was completely unacceptable by any reasonable military standard. Admiral Grant acknowledged their concerns with diplomatic courtesy. Then he informed the Council that humanity did not travel across the galaxy to lose slowly. The Third Fleet would engage the Krell hive ships with or without Council approval. He thanked the other commanders for their input and ended the transmission. Vexthal stared at his communication panel in disbelief. The human admiral had just announced his intention to ignore orders and launch what amounted to a suicide attack. The Drathan commander immediately began broadcasting protests and demands that the humans return to formation. The human fleet did not respond. Captain Derek Shaw addressed his crew over the ship-wide communication system. He told them honestly what they were about to do. They were going to punch through the Krell formation and destroy the hive ships. It would be dangerous, and they would take casualties. But it was the only way to end this battle quickly and save the colonies below. He said he was proud to serve with every person on the Valiant, and he knew they would do their duty. The Third Fleet formation shifted from a defensive line into an attack wedge. The carrier, Valiant, took position at the point, with heavy destroyers on either side. Frigates and support vessels filled out the formation, providing overlapping fields of fire. It was a formation designed for breakthrough assault, and it represented tactical doctrine the galaxy had never seen. Lieutenant Jake Stevens armed every weapon system on the Valiant. Railguns loaded with depleted uranium penetrators. Missile racks filled with high explosive and nuclear warheads. Laser batteries charged and ready. Point defense networks active and tracking targets. Electronic warfare systems prepared to jam enemy communications and sensors. Amy Wells identified the optimal approach vector. She plotted a course that would take them through the thinnest part of the Krell formation. It was still packed with hundreds of enemy contacts, but it was the best option available. Derek approved the course and gave the order to advance. The human fleet accelerated toward the Krell swarm. They moved faster than the Council ships, with violent maneuvers that would injure most alien crews. Human pilots pushed their vessels hard, accepting G-forces that their bodies had been trained to endure. The gap between the Third Fleet and the defensive line opened rapidly. Vexthal watched in horrified fascination as the human ships drove straight into the Krell formation. His tactical officer reported that the humans were using weapons that Council forces considered excessive. Nuclear warheads detonated, clearing paths through the swarm. Railgun fire tore through Krell bioships with brutal efficiency. Human electronic warfare blinded Krell coordination across entire sections of the battlefield. The fighting was savage. Krell ships swarmed the human formation from all directions. The Third Fleet's point defense systems fired continuously, shredding incoming attackers. When Krell vessels got through the defensive fire, human ships simply absorbed the damage and kept fighting. One destroyer took a direct hit that would have destroyed most Council vessels, but her damage control teams sealed the breach and the ship maintained formation. Derek Shaw gripped his command chair as the Valiant shook from multiple impacts. Damage reports scrolled across his screens. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 12. Port side armor compromised. 2 missile batteries offline. But Ben Murphy's engineering teams were already responding. The ship kept fighting. The human fleet drove deeper into the Krell formation, like a spear seeking a vital organ. They accepted damage that would make any council commander retreat. They fought with an intensity that seemed reckless but was actually precisely calculated. Every maneuver and every weapon's shot served the single purpose of reaching the hive ships. After 40 minutes of brutal combat, the Third Fleet broke through. Long-range sensors detected the Krell hive ship ahead. A massive organic vessel, 10 times larger than any other ship in the swarm. Derek ordered all ships to focus fire on that single target. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human missiles streaked through space, converging on the hive ship. Nuclear warheads designed to crack asteroids slammed into its organic armor. Railgun fire punched through its hull. The hive ship tried to flee, but human missiles were faster. The barrage continued for 17 minutes, until the massive vessel finally exploded in a burst of organic matter and escaping atmosphere. The effect on the Krell swarm was immediate and dramatic. Thousands of smaller ships suddenly lost coordination. They flew in confused circles, or simply stopped moving. The hive mind that directed them had been severed. What remained were individual organisms without purpose or direction. The Third Fleet did not pause to celebrate. Derek ordered his ships to begin systematic elimination of the remaining Krell forces. The human vessels moved through the disorganized swarm with cold efficiency. In less than 4 hours, the Krell threat was eliminated completely. The silence that followed the battle felt heavier than the combat itself. Captain Derek Shaw sat in his command chair and watched his screens display the aftermath of human warfare. Debris fields marked where Krell ships had been destroyed. Radiation signatures showed where nuclear weapons had detonated. The space around Petra 7 looked like a graveyard, and humanity had created most of it in less than 5 hours. Lieutenant Amy Wells reported casualty figures. 3 destroyers lost with all hands. 847 crew members who would never return home. The UES Valiant had taken 17 direct hits and suffered over 200 casualties. Commander Ben Murphy's engineering teams had performed miracles keeping the ship fighting, but the damage was extensive. Derek felt the weight of each death pressing down on him. The Third Fleet reformed into a defensive formation and began moving back toward the Council lines. Human damage control teams worked frantically to repair critical systems. Medical bays overflowed with wounded personnel. Supply officers calculated ammunition expenditures and fuel reserves. The human ships looked battered and scarred, but they maintained discipline even in victory. High Commander Vex Thal watched the human fleet return and struggled to process what he had witnessed. His tactical officer had recorded the entire engagement. The footage showed human warships fighting in ways that violated every principle of galactic military doctrine. They had used overwhelming firepower without concern for elegance. They had employed electronic warfare that the Council considered dishonorable. They had accepted casualties that any reasonable commander would have avoided, but they had won. In 5 hours, humanity accomplished what the Council fleet could not achieve in 3 days. The Krell swarm was destroyed. The colonies were safe, and Vex Thal's carefully maintained worldview about military superiority had shattered like glass. The Drathan commander opened a communication channel to Admiral Peter Grant. Vexthal's voice carried none of its usual arrogance. He asked how humanity had learned to fight like that. The question was simple, but it contained layers of confusion and fear and reluctant respect. Admiral Grant's response came after a long pause. He said humanity had not learned. They had remembered. Every tactic and weapon and strategy the Third Fleet employed came from centuries of human warfare. Wars between nations and ideologies and resources. Conflicts that killed millions and nearly destroyed their civilization multiple times. Humanity came to the stars hoping to leave that history behind, but they carried the lessons with them. The Admiral continued speaking, and his words were transmitted across every Council ship. He said, "The galaxy fought wars, like formal contests, with rules and honor. Humanity fought wars like existential threats to survival. When humans went to battle, they did not seek glory or territorial gain. They sought to end the conflict as quickly as possible by any means necessary. That approach seemed brutal because it was brutal. War itself was brutal, and pretending otherwise just prolonged the suffering. Vex-Thal listened and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding. The Drathan Empire had built its military tradition over thousands of years. They had refined warfare into an art form with proper protocols and acceptable tactics, but they had forgotten that war was ultimately about survival. Humanity remembered. The Council fleet began rescue and recovery operations. Several alien ships had taken critical damage during the battle and needed assistance. Human engineering teams volunteered to help with repairs. Vex-Thal watched in surprise as human personnel transferred to Drathan vessels and began working alongside his crews. The same humans who had fought with such ferocity now showed patience and skill, helping former skeptics. Captain Derek Shaw toured the damaged sections of the Valiant. He walked through corridors scarred by weapons fire and visited medical bays filled with wounded crew. He spoke with every person who could talk and held the hands of those who could not. Command required celebrating victories, but Derek knew the true cost. 847 families would receive notifications that their loved ones died in service to humanity. Lieutenant Jake Stevens was already analyzing the battle from a weapons perspective. His systems had performed well, but several improvements became obvious during actual combat. He made notes about modifications that could increase effectiveness. The work helped him avoid thinking about the fact that he had killed thousands of living beings in just a few hours. Commander Ben Murphy and his engineering teams worked around the clock, repairing critical systems. The Valiant's reactors needed recalibration. Her armor plating required replacement in multiple sections. Life support was running at 70% capacity. Ben coordinated the repairs with mechanical efficiency, but his eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had pushed himself and his people beyond normal limits. Amy Wells compiled the tactical data from the engagement. She had recordings of every maneuver and weapons engagement. The information would be valuable for training future human commanders. But as she reviewed the footage, Amy could not stop thinking about how easily things could have gone wrong. The Third Fleet accomplished its mission, but the margin between victory and disaster had been razor-thin. On board the Council flagship, Vex-Thal received a communication from the Galactic Council headquarters. The Council members had been monitoring the battle, and they wanted answers. How had humanity displayed such military capability? Why had they concealed their true strength for 3 years? What other surprises was humanity hiding? The Drathan commander tried to explain what he had witnessed, but words failed him. How could he describe ships that fought like demons? Crews that accepted damage, which should have forced surrender? Weapons that prioritized killing efficiency over traditional honor? He finally told the Council that they needed to see the battle recordings themselves. Captain Derek Shaw received his own communication from Admiral Grant. The Admiral informed him that Ambassador Kyle Harrison had been summoned to appear before the full Galactic Council. Humanity's military performance had shocked the entire galaxy and demanded explanation. Derek was ordered to prepare a detailed after-action report covering tactics and weapons and strategic decisions. The captain began working on the report immediately. He described the engagement in clinical military language. He explained why the Third Fleet chose an aggressive approach over defensive positions. He detailed the weapons systems that proved most effective against Krell bioships. He documented the casualties humanity suffered to achieve victory. The report was factual and thorough, but it could not capture the reality of what the Third Fleet had done. 3 days after the battle, the human fleet completed temporary repairs and prepared to return to Council space. The colonies on Petra 7 sent messages of gratitude to the human crews. The people who had been saved knew they owed their lives to warriors from Earth. But those same people also felt a new uncertainty about humanity. Their saviors had fought with a violence that was hard to reconcile with the peaceful traders who had joined the Council 3 years earlier. High Commander Vex-Thal arranged a meeting with Captain Derek Shaw before the fleets separated. The Drathan commander came aboard the Valiant and walked through her battle-damaged corridors. He saw human crew members working to repair their ship. He noticed the memorial wall where names of the dead were being added. He observed the quiet professionalism of people who had just fought and won a major battle. Derek met Vexthal in the Valiant's conference room. The two commanders sat across from each other, and neither spoke for several long seconds. Finally, the Drothan broke the silence. He said he had been wrong about humanity. He had mistaken their preference for peace as inability to fight. He asked Derek to explain how humans could be both diplomatic and deadly. The captain considered his answer carefully. He said, humanity learned through terrible experience that war was sometimes necessary, but never desirable. Earth's history included conflicts that killed millions over resources and ideology and simple hatred. Those wars taught humans that violence should be a last resort. But they also taught that when violence became necessary, it should be applied with absolute commitment to end the conflict quickly. Vexthal asked if human military doctrine was built entirely around this idea of overwhelming force. Derek shook his head and explained that it was more complicated. Human warfare combined strategy and tactics and logistics and psychology. But at its core was one simple principle. If something was worth fighting for, it was worth fighting to win. Half measures just prolonged suffering for everyone involved. The Drothan commander mentioned that galactic military tradition emphasized honor and proper conduct. Derek responded that humanity respected those ideals, but could not accept them in practice. Honor meant nothing to civilians being slaughtered. Proper conduct was worthless if it led to defeat. Humans fought to protect people, and sometimes protecting people required brutal methods. Vexthal stood to leave, and then paused. He asked Derek if humanity would be willing to share their military knowledge with the Council. The Drothan Empire had sophisticated weapons and trained crews, but they clearly did not understand modern warfare the way humans did. Derek said he would pass the request to Admiral Grant, but warned that learning human tactics meant accepting human philosophy about war. After Vexthal departed, Derek returned to his command chair. The Valiant would be traveling back to Council space where Ambassador Kyle Harrison would face questions about humanity's true nature. The galaxy had believed humans were weak. They had learned that humans were anything but weak. Now, they had to decide what to do with that knowledge. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Ambassador Kyle Harrison stood in the center of the room, while holographic displays showed footage from the Battle of Petra 7. 15 different alien species watched human warships tear through the Krell swarm with methodical violence. The recordings played without sound, but the images spoke clearly enough. Nuclear detonations, railgun fire shredding bioships, human vessels accepting damage that should have destroyed them and continuing to fight. Kyle had spent 3 years building relationships with these council members. He had attended hundreds of meetings and negotiated countless trade agreements. He had carefully cultivated humanity's image as peaceful merchants interested only in prosperity through cooperation. Now that image was shattered, and he stood alone, facing the consequences. The Valorum representative spoke first. Her translated voice carried confusion rather than anger. She asked why humanity had concealed their military capabilities. The Council had welcomed humans as junior members, assuming they were a young species still learning about galactic society. Instead, they discovered humans possessed weapons and tactics that shocked even the oldest civilizations. Kyle took a breath before responding. He said humanity had concealed nothing. Every human action since first contact had been genuine. The diplomatic approach was real. The focus on trade was sincere. The preference for negotiation over confrontation was honest. The Council had seen what they wanted to see. They observed peaceful behavior and concluded humans were incapable of violence. A Centauri council member interrupted, demanding to know why humanity maintained such powerful military forces if they truly preferred peace. Kyle's answer was simple. Because history taught humans that being peaceful did not guarantee others would treat you peacefully. Earth had learned through centuries of conflict that the best way to avoid war was to be ready for it. High Commander Vexthal stood from his seat. The Drothan commander looked different than he had before the battle. Some of his arrogance had been replaced with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. He told the council that they needed to understand what he witnessed at Petra 7. The humans fought in ways that violated every galactic military tradition, but they won completely. Vex Thal continued speaking, and his words carried weight. He said the Drathan Empire had refined warfare over thousands of years. They had established protocols and honor codes that governed how civilized species conducted military operations. But the Krell did not follow those protocols, and neither did humanity. The difference was that humans chose not to follow them, while the Krell simply did not understand them. The council chamber erupted in multiple conversations as representatives debated among themselves. Some argued that human tactics were excessive and barbaric. Others pointed out that human tactics had saved millions of lives on Petra 7. A few suggested that perhaps galactic military doctrine needed to be re-evaluated in light of what humanity demonstrated. Kyle waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. He said the council was asking the wrong questions. They wanted to know if humans were dangerous. The real question was what made humans different from other species. The answer was that humanity understood the true nature of warfare better than any civilization in the galaxy. He explained that most galactic species approached military conflict as an extension of politics. Wars had rules and boundaries, and acceptable outcomes. But humanity had experienced wars of extermination, conflicts where losing meant complete destruction. Those experiences taught humans that war was not a game with rules. It was violence in service of survival. The Valorum Elder asked if humanity considered all warfare to be existential. Kyle shook his head and said that was exactly the point. Humans distinguished between different kinds of conflicts. Trade disputes could be negotiated, border disagreements could be mediated, political differences could be discussed. But when something truly threatened innocent lives, humanity responded with every capability they possessed. A younger council member from a minor species asked the question that others were thinking. She wanted to know if the galaxy should fear humanity. Kyle considered his answer carefully, because this moment would define humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy for generations to come. He said fear was the wrong response. Humanity came to the stars seeking friendship and cooperation. Every human preference was for peace and mutual prosperity. But the Council needed to understand that peaceful intentions did not equal weakness. Humans would defend themselves and their allies with whatever force was required. The choice of whether humanity remained a peaceful partner or became something else rested with how the galaxy treated them. The council chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the implication of Kyle's words. Humanity was offering friendship, but warning against aggression. They were saying they preferred peace, but guaranteeing they could wage war. It was a position no other species had ever taken so bluntly. Captain Derek Shaw was invited to address the council via holographic communication. He stood on the bridge of the Valiant and faced a room full of alien leaders who now viewed humanity very differently. A Centauri representative asked Derek to explain human military philosophy in terms the council could understand. Derek spoke plainly. He said galactic forces fought battles. Humanity fought wars. Battles had rules and limitations and acceptable casualties. Wars had only one rule, which was to win and end the conflict as quickly as possible. The Council approached military action as a controlled process. Humanity approached it as organized violence in defense of their people. High Commander Vexthal asked Derek if humanity would be willing to train Council forces in human tactics. The Drathan commander said his empire recognized that their military doctrine was inadequate against enemies like the Krell. They needed to learn from humans, who clearly understood modern warfare better. Derek's response surprised the Council. He said humanity would share their knowledge, but warned that adopting human tactics meant accepting human costs. The Third Fleet lost 3 ships and over 800 personnel at Petra 7. That was the price of victory using human methods. The question was whether other species were willing to pay similar prices. Several council members looked uncomfortable. The casualty numbers seemed excessive by galactic standards. One representative pointed out that council forces fighting defensively had lost fewer personnel overall. Derek acknowledged that but noted the council was also losing the battle before humanity arrived. He explained that human military doctrine accepted higher casualties in exchange for shorter conflicts. A defensive battle might last weeks or months, with gradually mounting losses. An aggressive assault might cost more initially, but would end the fighting in days. Humanity chose the aggressive approach because it minimized total suffering even if it concentrated the cost. Ambassador Kyle returned to the center of the chamber. He said, humanity wanted to be clear about their position going forward. They remained committed to peaceful cooperation with all Council species. They would honor their agreements and continue building positive relationships, but they would also maintain their military capabilities and use them when necessary to defend innocent lives. The Council members began formal deliberations about humanity's status. Some argued for restrictions on human military forces. Others suggested that humanity should be given greater responsibilities within Council security structures. The debate continued for hours, while Kyle waited patiently. Finally, the Council reached a decision. Humanity's status would be elevated from junior member to full member, with all associated rights and responsibilities. The Outer Rim assignment previously proposed would be replaced with an offer of core world territories. But humanity would also be expected to contribute to Council military operations when threats emerged. Kyle accepted the new status on behalf of humanity. He thanked the Council for their wisdom and promised that humans would prove themselves worthy partners. But privately, he knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned that humans could fight. Now, they needed to learn that humans could be trusted, not to become aggressive conquerors. Captain Derek Shaw conducted memorial services for the crew members lost at Petra 7. He stood before a wall, displaying their names and ranks, and reminded everyone that their sacrifice protected millions of innocent lives. The service was simple and solemn. Human military tradition did not glorify death in battle. It honored those who died while acknowledging the tragedy of their loss. Lieutenant Amy Wells asked Derek if he thought the galaxy would remember what humanity showed them. The captain said they would remember the violence and the victory. Whether they understood the philosophy behind human actions remained to be seen. Amy wondered if other species could learn to fight like humans. Derek responded that fighting like humans required understanding war the way humans did, and he hoped most species never had to learn those lessons. High Commander Vexathal met with Admiral Peter Grant to discuss military cooperation between the Drathan Empire and humanity. The Admiral agreed to provide tactical training and share information about human weapons systems. But he warned Vexathal that effectiveness in warfare came from more than just technology and tactics. It came from being willing to accept the costs that victory demanded. The Drathan commander asked if humans ever regretted their approach to warfare. Grant was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said humans regretted every war they had ever fought. They mourned every casualty and questioned every decision that led to violence. But they also recognized that sometimes violence was the only way to stop greater violence. The key was making sure warfare remained a last resort rather than a first option. Weeks after the battle, the Third Fleet returned to Earth for repairs and rest. Captain Derek Shaw stood on the observation deck of the Valiant, looking down at humanity's homeworld. The blue sphere turning slowly beneath him represented everything his crew had fought to protect. Not just Earth, but the ideals and values that humanity carried into space. Derek thought about the galaxy's reaction to human military capabilities. Some species now viewed humans with respect. Others regarded them with fear. A few seemed to be reconsidering their own military doctrines in light of what happened at Petra 7. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and humanity sat at the center of that shift. Lieutenant Jake Stevens joined Derek at the viewport. He asked the captain if things would go back to normal now that everyone knew what humans could do. Derek smiled slightly and said normal was probably not possible anymore. The galaxy had seen humanity's true nature. Some would become closer allies because they understood humans could protect them. Others might become more distant because they feared what humans represented. Commander Ben Murphy completed his damage assessment of the Valiant. The repairs would take months and cost enormous resources. But the ship would fly again, and her crew would be ready when called upon. Ben understood that the Battle of Petra 7 was unlikely to be humanity's last military action. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and now everyone knew that humans were the ones you called when danger needed to be stopped. Ambassador Kyle Harrison remained at the council working to build on humanity's new status. He negotiated access to better trade routes and more advanced technology. He formed alliances with species who appreciated what humans had done at Petra 7. He carefully managed relationships with species who remained uncertain about humanity's intentions. The work was delicate because humanity's position had fundamentally changed. Before the battle, they were dismissed as harmless. After the battle, they were recognized as powerful. Kyle needed to show that power did not equal aggression. Humanity could be strong and peaceful. They could maintain military forces while pursuing diplomatic solutions. They could win battles while preferring to avoid them. President Nathan Cole addressed the United Earth Assembly about the new reality humanity faced. He said the galaxy now understood that humans were not weak but that knowledge came with responsibilities. Humanity needed to prove they could be trusted with the power they possessed. They needed to show that their preference for peace was genuine, even though their capacity for war was proven. The president spoke about the 847 people who died at Petra 7. He said their sacrifice bought humanity respect in the galaxy, but also bought safety for millions of innocent colonists. It was a terrible price, but one that reflected humanity's commitment to protecting others. Earth would honor their memory by ensuring their deaths served the cause of a better galaxy. Captain Derek Shaw received orders for the Valiant's next assignment. After repairs were complete, his ship would join a joint council patrol along the galactic rim. It was a routine mission, but it carried symbolic weight. Humanity was being trusted to work alongside alien forces as equals rather than as junior partners. Derek gathered his senior officers to discuss the upcoming patrol. Amy Wells noted that they would be working with some of the same species who had doubted humanity before Petra 7. Jake Stevens wondered if those species would trust human tactical decisions. Ben Murphy said they would learn to trust through experience, just like humanity learned to trust them. The captain told his officers that this was exactly what humanity needed. Not more battles to prove their strength, but opportunities to show they could cooperate peacefully. The galaxy had seen what humans could do in war. Now they needed to see what humans could build in peace. The story of humanity's entrance into galactic society would be told for generations. How a species that appeared weak shocked the entire galaxy with their strength. How peaceful traders revealed themselves as deadly warriors. How the Council learned that humanity's greatest power was not their weapons or tactics, but their wisdom about when to use them. Ambassador Kyle Harrison stood again in the Grand Chamber, looking at the alien representatives who had once dismissed humanity. They watched him now, with different eyes. Eyes that had seen what humans could do. Eyes that wondered what humans would do next. Kyle met their gazes calmly because he knew the answer. Humanity would continue being exactly what they always were. A species that valued peace, but understood war. People who preferred negotiation, but excelled at conflict. Traders and diplomats and scientists who could become warriors when innocent lives needed defending. The Galaxy Council had thought humans feared battle, but they learned the truth. Humans understood battle so well they did everything possible to avoid it, while remaining always ready to win it.